Welcome to our course on EMS. Today we'll be looking at Lesson 1, Money Flow. This is a short lesson just to teach you the different types of money flow. Now, I want you to have a pen and paper handy, preferably a workbook of some kind that you use for all your learning point lessons, because we're going to be drawing a lot. Feel free to pause this video at any time should you feel that I'm going too fast. Now, when we are done with this lesson, you should know how the flow of money works, and you should understand money management better. Before we begin, I want you to pause this video and write down these words. And then I want you to write a definition for each of these words. If you have your own definition, then you can write that down. But if you aren't sure and if you don't think your definition is correct, please look them up in a dictionary and then play this video once you are done. Right, so you've now defined all the words in the word bank. That means we can start with today's lesson. So I want to draw your attention to the mom and the kid on the screen. Now, that's Mrs. Jones, and that's her son who wants a new phone. Now, Mrs. Jones and her son is what we call a household, right? Mrs. Jones's job is a hairdresser. So Mrs. Jones offers her skills to the labor market. She does something for money. And her employer is known as a firm. Now, in return for her skills and her labor, she receives money. This money is paid monthly, and it is known as a salary. Now, I want you to think about your own household. How are your parents related to the labor market? How do your parents receive a salary? And I want you to think of as many examples of firms and of skills that your parents can offer the labor market. Now, I want you to draw the following in your workbook. This is how we exchange labor for money. So pause this video and quickly copy this down, and then I will explain it. So welcome back. Now we look at how labor is exchanged for money. First of all, households have to enter into the labor market. You'll see the little pink arrow goes back to the labor market. And they work for firms in order for them to earn money. Customers come to these firms and use the services or buy the products on sale at this firm. Then the firms put the money back into the labor market by giving money to the households. And these households then go out to firms such as ShopRite and Checkers and buy groceries. And in that way, the money flows through the economy. I hope you wrote this down in your book. Right, so we're still busy with Mrs. Jones. Now, Mrs. Jones has saved up enough money to buy her son that smartphone. And Mrs. Jones's household will go to the electronics store. Do you remember what a household means? This store called Electronics has the best deal on smartphones. They are also known as a firm. Firms, just like Mrs. Jones's employer, offer goods and services to households via the market. And Mrs. Jones needs to pay money for that smartphone. She can't just walk in and take it. She has to pay money that she earned. Now let's add the goods and services market to our previous drawing. So I want you to pause the video and add the new goods and services market to our drawing. Right, so we're back. I hope you paused this video and took time to write down the drawing. Now, we said that Mrs. Jones works for a firm. She offers her labor to a firm. And that firm in turn pays her for her labor. She then takes that money to the goods and services market, and she buys her son a smartphone. That goods and services market can then go to different firms to spend that money. And this is once again how it flows. Owner of the electronics store will go to Mrs. Jones's hairdressers to get his hair cut, and Mrs. Jones gets pays for that so she can go back to his shop and buy more smartphones. Now, before we start with the banking sector, I want you to note what a transaction is. A transaction is when I exchange my goods or my services for money. So, Mrs. Jones gives her hairdressing skill in exchange for money. Mrs. Jones isn't paid in cash. She is paid into her bank account. Many people who work for employers who offer their skills to the labor market are paid via banks. There are a lot of banks. I want you to think of as many as you can and write them down. After you've written them down, those banks together are known as the banking sector. Now, Mrs. Jones wants to draw 800 Rand to buy her son the smartphone. So she has to use her debit card. The debit card is a small little card that you carry with you that has all of your information on it with regards to your bank. Now, Mrs. Jones can also pay using her debit card. She doesn't have to go and withdraw cash every single time, and she can pay different firms for their goods and services. Once Mrs. Jones swipes her card, then she will be part of a transaction, and her bank will make sure that her money goes to the firm's bank. When Mrs. Jones buys the smartphone, she uses her debit card to pay for it. I want you to picture Mrs. Jones walking into the electronics shop and paying for the smartphone. Now, we need to add the banking sector to the middle of our drawing. So once again, I want you to pause this video and add the banking sector to the middle of your drawing. So we're back. You'll remember that Mrs. Jones and her son, they're a household. Mrs. Jones is part of the labor market. She's a hairdresser and she works for a firm, the hairdressing shop. She gets a salary every single month, which goes into her bank account. Many of the banks are known as the banking sector. So the firm pays the money into Mrs. Jones's bank account, and that then goes back into her household. She then takes her card, walks to the electronics shop and buys the smartphone. So the money goes out of her account and into the goods and services market. That is how the money flows. Now we look at the government sector or the public sector. So Mrs. Jones's salary is not all her own. Unfortunately, her employer has to deduct employment tax, known as payee. Everyone has to pay tax if they earn over a certain amount. This employment tax is then used back into education, hospitals, schools, and it's used to ensure the safety for all of the citizens. And a country can only run correctly if the government uses this tax correctly. If you work for a school or a hospital or any government institution, then you are known as being part of the government sector. Employment tax isn't the only tax that is paid. We also pay sales tax called VAT or value added tax. Do you know what the percentage is on that? If you do, I want you to write it down and I'll tell you the answer in just a second. Now, VAT is paid to the government each time a transaction takes place. So that smartphone that Mrs. Jones bought, she has to pay VAT on that. It's usually calculated with the price. And the answer to the VAT question, what is the percentage of VAT we pay? It's 15%. Now we have to add the government sector to our drawing. So I want you to once again pause this video and add the government sector to your drawing. So we are back. Once again, remember, Mrs. Jones and her son is a household. Mrs. Jones is in the labor market, and then she works for a firm. This firm then pays her monthly salary into her bank account, which goes back into her household. She then buys a smartphone from the goods and services market. This goods and services market has to pay a 15% sales tax back to the government sector. Mrs. Jones also has to pay employment tax, which is paid out of her salary to the government sector. There's a lot of extra information written on this page, and I want you to pause this video and write down the extra information on the right-hand side of the page.